Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the First Stars Podcast fourth season. My loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. It's an amazing episode because Steve Orlando returns to the mothership to discuss Conquest 2099 and the scale trade. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Orlando. Thank you for coming back to the Versus Stars podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be back.
So my pleasure. You're my first guest of season 4, so appreciate it.
Right on, right on.
So you're currently the writer of the Scale Trade from Magma Comix. So what inspired the creation of the series and what made Magma Comix the perfect home for it?
Oh man. Well, so Scale Trade was actually inspired by something in real life, which might seem surprising perhaps, because as folks know, there are not dragons in real life. And for folks who don't know, Scale Trade is about the folks hunting the illegal dragon trade in a world where dragons have just been part of the world from the very beginning. But what it was inspired by is a very real thing. There's a gentleman down in Florida that does very similar vigilante style work to fight the illegal horse meat trade. So when we found out about the horse meat vigilante, we wanted to honor him, but also take some inspiration and blow it up for the comic scale. So the illegal horse trade became the illegal dragon trade, and Scale Trade was born.
So the trade paperback for Scale Trade has a really interesting foreword by a man named Paul Goodenough. I don't know if that's his real last name, but Paul Goodenough. That discusses the importance of fiction in changing the world. So how important is the allegory of endangered wildlife to this series?
Um, I mean, look, it's important, of course, because it's a key part of the book, but it's also, we didn't want this to be Captain Planet, because that's out there as much as I love it. And that's how I know there's 5 elements, not 4 to this day. So it's important, but it's a character and action story first. We didn't want this to be a polemic. People often, sort of tune out when they feel they're being talked down to. Conversely, a story can be really powerful in presenting something in a rich, relatable way that maybe folks don't get to experience in real life. So it's important because this is an important topic in general, even though dragons aren't real. But we don't want to tell you how to feel about it. We want you to feel that way based on what you see. We want you to have the visceral reaction, the organic reaction, rather than throwing it at you. So that's the hope with the book. So it is and it isn't a quote unquote issues book. We would definitely say it's an action fantasy first. But hopefully you're in the characters and the relationship to draw you in, and then when you see what happens to them, yeah, you're moved by it. That's how it happens in real life. People don't just blast, well, people do blast ideas into your head. That's what TV's for. But when you have a real reaction, it's because of something you've seen. It comes from you. So if we've done our job right and told the compelling story, hopefully you do sort of wonder about topics like this. But that's as far as we want to go with these things because our job is to entertain first.
So the interesting thing with Scale Trade, given the how the series exists, you have obviously you got to develop character, you got a world build, and then like I said, you do have the working allegory. Is it hard to give room for each one of those to make each one function distinctly on its own?
It's always a challenge, especially for me, because to be clear, like the Silmarillion is my favorite Tolkien book. So if I could write a book that was just about the fake history of dragons in this universe, I would be there. But the thing is, 4 people would buy it, and they're all in my family. So it is a push and pull because I have idiosyncratic interests, but we work in a mainstream pop culture medium. So uh, and it's just, that brings it around. I'll bring this around to answer a part of what I forgot to answer previously. Why Magma? That's what great editors who know you and know how to bring the best out of you. That's what they're for, right? So yeah, it can be a challenge. Left to my own devices, I might write 5 issues of just the history of the fake history, the imagined history of dragons on Earth. But that needs to be paired up with hopefully what my other talents are. That's for other folks to decide, but that's also what editorial is there for, to sort of create the guardrails and guide you to tell the best version of the story you want to tell. And that's what the folks at Magma have been wonderful about. Denton Tipton is a great editor. Bobby Curnow is a great editor. He's now back as editor-in-chief of IDW, so it looks like the industry saw his skill and recognized it. And the other thing is that it's just, look, for the moment we pitched this story, they believed in it. And that doesn't always happen at publishers without, I'm not making news here. I'm not like shading what someone specific, but it's great to have people know what a story is, read a pitch, and just once they decide they're on board, just truly believe in it. And that's what the folks at Magma did. So and that means, yeah, like that means supporting Megan and I, Megan Wong, my co-creator, in not just publishing the story, but like I said, to bring it around to this question, making sure that we are focused and we are telling the leanest, sexiest, most engaging version of the story we want to tell. And sometimes that means, when you're a buffoon like me, that means saving you from some of your worst impulses. Or best impulses if you enjoy a wiki hole, but saving you from your impulses, we'll say.
And I think one of the interesting things about the scale trade, the series, basically what it has is in our world, there's these magical creatures. These are these dragons that are absolutely gorgeous. They're beautiful, powerful, like I said, magical. And people think to themselves, you know what would be great? Let's kill those damn things and eat them. And it's kind of like a weird suggestion. It suggests that maybe not weird, but it does suggest what people inherently are like.
I was
And
going to say we do that all the time.
right. I
I
mean,
mean, all you need to
dolphins,
do
you
is
know?
read about the height of the whaling industry, where all we wanted was the whale oil, and we were throwing the meat overboard. So that's beautiful. Let's kill it and see how it tastes is perhaps one of the most darkly human instincts, I would argue.
I mean, what does that suggest about us as a species? Is it just because something is wonderful that we want it for ourselves? Is it that we just can't be happy with something just existing? Well, what does it say about us, our nature?
Oh, I don't know if it's anything that dark. I think we have a lot of privilege and luxury, being at the top of the food chain on the planet, obviously. And because of that, I listen, I mean, I'm not clearly, I shouldn't say clearly, but if you follow me on Instagram or things, like, I'm clearly not a vegetarian. So like I think that we have those impulses. One of the things that I think happens, though, is after thousands and thousand years at the top, we don't necessarily realize, to actually quote a semi-appropriate aphorism, like how the sausage is made. I know a lot of people who have no problem eating meat, for example, and I don't either. Although I'm not big on factory farming, that's cruel rather than, necessary. Uh, but those people, it often seems like they don't want to know it was a living thing, right? Like many people will eat a steak, but act as though once they get it in the supermarket, it comes from the steak tree, I guess, prepackaged. Um, Now, I think those people maybe need to evaluate, where they're coming from. But I think that even that luxury comes from where we sit. We haven't really had to fight and hunt and kill things to survive, for thousands and thousands of years. Not really. Though, of course, some people in the world still do. So I just think that it's become a little easy, and it's become easy to distance ourselves. And I'm not indicting that. I don't think it's anything necessarily even nefarious, but it's just a fact. Some people, especially if you live in like a food desert, it's not like you've ever seen how food happens, So I think if anything, it's a lack of experience or experiences. It's a lack of stepping outside your own bubble. I'm not here to ascribe anything really malicious to it, but I think it's a function of our privilege. And it sounds crazy to say, of course, because here we are talking on the internet, but like we haven't really been a participant uh, in the struggle, like the food chain struggle since time immemorial, basically. So I think sometimes it can just be, um, it's easy to make that jump because we don't really see often that these are living things. We see, oh, we're hungry, there is a steak,
Hmm.
and I often get, like, listen, yeah, like if it bothers you that something you've eaten is a living thing, then maybe you do need to reevaluate, But me, like, now you're pushing me into, yes, I am being a little bit of on a little bit of a soapbox here, but no, I mean, like if I have a soapbox, it's not eating meat, but it is not wasting, for example, parts of an animal. I'm big on whole animal butchering and things like that and usage because these were living creatures, and they are beautiful creatures. So we need to at least respect, in my opinion, where they're coming from. And I think the more people see, if the more hands-on experience they have with food production, they have a lot more respect for it from top to bottom, holistically. And that goes for farming and vegetables and things too, and of course it's maybe not the quote unquote life of something in that case, but it's the labor, it's the work, it's all the human labor, of course, that goes into these things that I think also people miss. I think, like I said, it's a privilege, it's luxury that's gotten us here. It's not malice.
So when you're creating the world and you're building up the world, obviously you have with dragons you have this the meat trade aspect of it there as well. But the other part to think about it is that humans are now experiencing this magical creature, can create hybrids of itself, can mate with anything. How did you factor in how what the human response maybe in their worldview would be when something like a dragon can exist within it?
I mean, I don't think it's. I mean, we've seen how we treat, to be frank, analogous creatures in the real world. So that in of itself, especially because nearly everything that is done to dragons in this book is drawn from some real world parallel. The propaganda about them breathing fire when they don't is very similar to the propaganda and hysteria around pit bull ownership, for example. The lie that they're an inherently violent or dangerous breed, which is not true. Um, Obviously they can be bred that way and they're extremely powerful, but being powerful is different than being dangerous. The hunting for sport. I mean, again, just look at any large animal and any rich asshole in the world. They probably have a picture of them sitting on top of something they have no legal right to kill. So, honestly, that part was not hard because we already do all this shit, just not to the same species in one.
And I think another thing that's kind of interesting is that there's an aspect too about dragons in this world that you created that there are dragons that have killed people. It feels like there's a certain element to like sharks where there is a certain percentage that will that have killed people, but that's because of a trespass on the part of people, it seems like.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and that's another thing we do, right? We imagine and we project relationships upon animals that are not always necessarily domesticated. Having a dog or a cat is different than having a wild animal that you happen to live with, and tame is not the same as domesticated. So even that, yeah. I mean, look, Siegfried and Roy got eaten by their fucking tiger, right? And like, and they thought that they had a good relationship with that animal, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean, you're right. Some have been involved in violence, but as you said as well, much like in the real world, that is often also the fault of the human. Actually, we were just watching my fiance and I were just watching the X trilogy this weekend. Here's a
Mm.
weird segue, right? For folks who don't know, it involves X and Pearl involve a farm where people get fed to this alligator that lives in the lake, and we were sitting here watching Pearl, and as this alligator is eating people, and we're kind of like, Theta, the alligator, she's just being an alligator. This is not her fault. Pearl is the villain.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like these are animals. They're wild. They don't necessarily have, not necessarily, they don't have the reasoning, logic, or morals we have, and we often project upon them those, and that can be dangerous, for sure. But we're creating that danger, not them. Yeah, like if you stick your hand in a tiger's mouth and get your hand bit off, it's not really the tiger's fault because tigers bite hands off. You offered up the hand.
In the comic book, Carmen joins the DCA as an agent. He dedicates his life then to protecting these dragons at the risk of his own life. What does he see in the opponents of dragons that maybe a regular person doesn't?
I think for him, he had that. I mean, Carmen is a dreamer. He is perhaps naive, at least at the start. But he has that, for him, dragons are that thing, that love that never sort of left him. And I think a lot of people have that. It's just not always the same thing, right? For the foundational moment for him is that scale watching trip he takes to, I think, Yellowstone, if I recall, and he has that moment where he sees this dragon and its uh, spawn, its infants. Sorry, it's been a long day. It's calves. I knew I would get to what they probably are called. And that's that moment for him. That's the moment where he realizes what he loves and what he wants to do. Now, not everybody has that for an animal, but most people have that for something, like, to be honest, for me, that's when I got my first comic. I've only ever wanted to do this job. Not that I haven't had others, of course, but this is what I always wanted to do. So, I didn't see a dragon flying overhead. I opened up my first book when I was 2 years old, and I couldn't even read then, but I saw the colors and the characters and the pictures, and I knew those were worlds I wanted to live in. So. I think everybody has that moment for something, hopefully, when they find their passion. It doesn't have to be big and grandiose like it is for Carmen, or even for me, or someone who only had like one big career goal, right? But everybody has something. And I think for him, that's what it was. But hopefully, when folks read that, they feel a relatability to that, even if they're not specifically passionate about animal rights or something like that. They're passionate about something. I say that a lot. Like, my favorite movie is Creed. And so many of my friends won't watch it because it's a sports movie, air quote. And I'm just, and I'll say, like, it is and it isn't. I mean, boxing is what he needs to do because he loves it and needs it so much and nobody else understands. But what it's really about is pursuing your passion in spite of everybody telling you that it can never happen or you shouldn't do it or it's a pipe dream. So when I say it like that, I think it's very relatable, even if you don't necessarily like boxing. And likewise, having something you really care for and want to fight for, that's what really drives Carmen. Even if, of course, that focus is different depending on who the person is.
So in the comic book, existing in contrast to Carmen is Agent Cutter. When you're thinking about his character, was he ever, you think, a true believer in the mission?
I think absolutely. Cutter, he probably still thinks he is, first of all. But I think he absolutely was. He stands in for a lot of people uh who maybe have stayed in the game too long, who have compromised themselves too much. And again, look, I think that goes for not just the game he's in, but nearly any game. Look, every single one of my peers, myself included, at some point has sat at a bar in the comics industry or at a restaurant, it doesn't matter. We don't have to be drinking, and said, like the king said, comics will break your heart, kid. And if they fuck Kirby, they'll fuck you too. So, no passion, no industry is immune to this kind of cynicism. Cutter probably believes he really is doing the good work, but the fact is that he's so much of the ground beneath him has been chipped away that unfortunately he doesn't even realize how fast he's falling, and hopefully that's tragic. If we ever do more, I think there's a space for him to evolve. Because once again, I mean, look at welcome to across the board random references with Steve Orlando. Like, look at a show like Hacks, where a character like Jean Smart's character, Deborah Vance, is remembering and relearning and reigniting her passion for comedy because of the influence of someone younger who still has that drive and things like that, or at least a different point of view. So I think that if the book ever continues, I think there's room for Cutter to come back in and maybe have that fire lit again. But right now, it's that pilot light is definitely fucking low.
So, I mean, they're almost like staring at mirrors of each other. They're a reflection. Carmen can see Cutter as what he could become. Cutter can see Carmen as what he used to be. Is one direction more persuasive than the other?
Um, I don't know, to be honest, and I don't know if I should, like good. Well, I wouldn't say good because again, that's self-serving. But if a story works, it makes you think, and it doesn't have simple answers. Um, what is the right way forward? Is it 100% uncompromising ideological purity? Is it the opposite? Is it compromising in common ground for the greater good, choosing the lesser evil? Um, I think that, as always, unfortunately, the answer is somewhere in between. If you never bend at all, God, my allegories are all over the place. But if you have no bend at all, then it's easier for you to break, to be frank. That's a metallurgical fact. And conversely, if all you do is bend, then you can get tied in knots. And I'm starting to sound a little bit like your grandpa here, but I think that is the truth. I think on a wide enough arc, you want to check into balance between these two extremes.
Are we going to see the moment when Cutter does fall for the first time?
I mean, I would argue that he takes a pretty hard fall when he goes to jail at the end of the, the first.
Well, I mean the first plunge into doing compromising the his whatever the deals he used to have. Will we have that moment when he first compromised?
Oh, I understand now. Listen, if we do more, absolutely. We know what the next arc is, if we ever get a chance to come back. And I don't know that Cutter is in it, but it feels right that he would come around for a hypothetical end of a trilogy, and hopefully, at minimum, have his moment where he's a craggy old man that finally does the right thing. But first we have to see if we can ever do more and get through what would hopefully be a very exciting second arc that Megan and I have planned, but a lot of it will depend on how the trade goes.
So we're not guaranteed the next series yet because you end it with a definite setup for what comes next.
Yeah, because you got to be looking towards the future. But I would be a lie to say that we are guaranteed anything. It would certainly depend on the numbers for the collected edition.
So to just kind of poke at without giving, I'm trying to think how best to ask the next question without giving away spoilers too much. Because I guess it goes, why does at at the end of the trade, why does Carmen think that his new path is a better path? And how will he avoid the landmines of the previous one?
Well, I think that Carmen believes that the system has become shackles, I mean, and many people, yeah, are feel shackled by bureaucracy. I feel I feel shackled by S&P and comics right now. So, um, as I said, when you live in that extreme like he does, like him going solo in some way, I'm sure he thinks it's going to be easier, but of course we know the reality is it's just all different problems.
Hmm.
So I think that's what, I'm sure he thinks that all of his problems have just solved themselves, but that's not true. And by the way, that's just like every guy that gets sick. I keep relating it back to comics or entertainment because this is obviously a fantasy world where you're saving dragons, but a lot of people go through things like this. Look how many people, leave licensed or corporate work, quote unquote, and go creator owned, which I've done, we've all done, and are immediately hit with the fact like, wow, I really am on my own. Suddenly I'm my own editor. Suddenly I'm my own production manager, all these things. And that's not always a problem. It often isn't, but it is just a different set of problems. It's not like the fucking promised land. So I think that for Carmen, he believes that he's solved all his problems. Now, of course, our job is to show him what new hurdles lie ahead. And of course, hopefully, have him figure out that the answer is somewhere in the middle.
Another thing I really do like that you did in Scale Trade, for some reason, maybe because it's just in my head now, it just kind of comes it hitting as prescient or what's going on in the world right now. The idea of the gala, where the wealthy and the Hollywood actors, they don't really believe in the cause, but they find it's good to be seen believing in the cause, and I think I found that was absolutely fascinating. It was kind of that kind of how you view all these like celebrities and wealth and all that who do these special causes in the world, but probably in the end really don't give a shit other than they want to be seen caring.
It's not how I view all of them, because I have firsthand experience with many of them, in both scenarios, but it's certainly something I've seen. But I would never say it's how I view all of them because look, I've been on the ground after hurricanes have hit, rolling on my sleeves and feeding people who have nothing with celebrity chefs and people who are much more successful than I am, and there's no bullshit there. They are dirtying their hands for people who've lost everything, when they absolutely don't have to. Um, at least in a fiscal sense. In a moral sense, I would argue it's an obligation. That's why I was there too. But at the same time, and that's Hurricane Michael. At the same time, when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, I was selling wine in a store that will not be revealed because this is not a becoming story. And one of my client, and there's a travel advisor in New York City. And one of my clients came up to the store, and I said, "What do you mean? What are you doing here? We're happy to see you, but no one's supposed to be able to leave the city." And without a hint of irony, she said, "Oh, well, those rules are generally for the poor."
Oh, whoosh.
Uh, so, so I've seen both sides, and both sides exist, and yeah, there are many people who just want to show up, be seen showing up, but there are definitely people who get in the mud as well. But that sort of vapidity, the sort of performative caring, I do see it, and it's particularly repugnant to me. But so it felt like there would be a good place in the book for it, and pick your allegory, right? Like, I mean, look at something like foie gras, which is highly controversial, and yet, though everybody knows it's nearly always cruel, like it's not so cruel that like the world's greatest chefs who don't really need to use it, stop using it, but they'll probably admit that it's cruel. Okay, you admit it's cruel, but why aren't you fucking doing anything different? Meanwhile, you got guys like Eric Ripert, who at least at one point and for a long time, he still had one of the best restaurants in the world, and it was entirely vegetarian. So the joke's on many people. He might not be now, I don't know for sure, but it was for a long time. But so anyway, yes, the answer is I've absolutely seen it a lot. It's not everybody, of course, because nothing is everybody. But I've seen it plenty, and I think we all have.
So how and where can our listeners get a hold of the trade paperback for Scale Trade?
Well, we're out in comic stores either this week or next. So if you are at your local comic store, that you can grab it, they can order it for you. And as far as the book market, we should be out, I believe, the week of November 12th. So we will be wide outside of comic stores in the direct market in the 12th, and we should be in the direct market if we're not already there this week.
Very cool. And do you have time to talk about Conquest 2099?
Sure.
All right, perfect. I must say, I found it absolutely fascinating, Conquest 2099, which you're writing for Marvel Comic Books. So, how do you get involved in the project, and which aspect of it was the most interesting?
Well, I mean, I've been the 2099 guy since the 30th anniversary. We've been really lucky to have Peter and I think Roger Antonio do their Symbiote Spider-Man 2099 miniseries. That was one of the flashback minis set earlier in the run, so that was during Peter's run. As far as pushing 2099 forward, I have been really lucky that Marvel's been trusting me with it for the past couple years. And it's been a blast. They've asked me to make a lot of new characters and introduce a lot of new characters to the world, both on Earth and in space and in the horror realm of 2099. And I mean, I can't sit here and lie to folks. Like making up new stuff is one of the best parts of this job. Some people just want to sit on a classic character for a long time, and of course I would love to do that too at one point, but I love making up new things. I love making up new characters. So, with them asking to bring a lot of new folks in, it's kind of a dream come true for me, along with using some of the icons, as many as I can, that I grew up with reading. And that started, this is our fifth miniseries, actually. We did Exodus, we did Dark Genesis. Well, Exodus was this big anniversary event for the 30th anniversary. Dark Genesis was basically Maximum Carnage 2099. We did Spider-Man, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, which was a focus on our horror characters. And then, of course, we went to Annihilation, where we started building out the cosmic part of 2099 in setup and anticipation of Conquest. So it was all kind of, I can't say it was a baton hand or a relay race because I'm the one holding it every time. I'm juggling it, right? But I've been excited that every time we reach the end, they say, okay, what's next? Here's some things that could really kick ass. And with Conquest, finally being able to bring all of these characters we'd introduced together, along with as many classics as we can get in as well. Was really, really exciting. We've done a lot of series of one shots and things like that. This was not that. It was going to be a big epic now that all the pieces were on the table. And as far as what I'm most excited about, honestly, like, listen, it is all the characters folks love in 2099 are in it. At the same time, like this is a Dracula miniseries. Like he is the main character, even though he is the quote unquote villain, he's the antagonist, but there's someone worse that he's going after. And I've been really, really lucky to work with this version of Dracula. You know, sometimes the realities of where you're working and what other people are doing force creativity in a really, really exciting way. And that's not a hidden complaint. Like when we found out Conquest was going to be happening, here's this big Dracula vampire and monster space monster miniseries. Oops, but we're also doing Blood Hunt like 2 months before, right? So I knew because I had read the scripts that Jed did. That was going to be the big, you know, Dracula the vampire lore type of miniseries. So when we looked at Conquest, we had to look at Dracula the man, you know, and of course he is still a vampire. He's doing many vampire things. Don't get worried, folks. But the point of view, I mean, this is the noble monster, the sort of broken leader. We wanted to make this a miniseries about him as the person that came from Wallachia, that has been here for hundreds of years, that would do anything for his kind, who he really loves, including things that are truly demonstrably terrible, to protect them. So that came because we knew Blood Hunt was coming up, and what we got was, I think, something that's you know, we don't step on Blood Hunt at all. They feel extremely different, even though they both star probably not probably the most famous vampire in history. Um, and what I got to do there is essentially turn Dracula into like a Miltonian type hero. Not to get too literary nerd for people, but I mean, one of my advisors in college was a Milton scholar. A lot of people look at Lucifer in Paradise Lost as the first romantic hero in literature. And this is kind of how we frame Dracula in this book. You know, he's faced with this massive tragedy in Paradise Lost. It is the fall from heaven after the war in Conquest. It's the devastation of Domus Draconum, the new vampire homeworld. And he feels that he's failed his people. Uh, and what we explore in this story is his reaction, his lashing out in almost, you know, a suicide run to get justice for his people while he can against their attackers. And that's very similar to why you see Lucifer sort of grow into the character we know him as in Paradise Lost. He volunteers to go and explore creation in place of his men because he can't bear to have anyone else suffer on his behalf anymore.
Mm.
Uh, so with Dracula, especially just because we had this big lore story going on with Blood Hunt, this is Dracula the character, Dracula the wounded man, who really will do anything to avenge vampire kind. And as you see, in a way, I think that's even more dangerous because that's his heart. You know, I mean, he might be and probably is a monster, but he does love his people. So when you fuck with them, things get very, very bad. And that's what we explore in Conquest. Of course, galaxy wide, which is very, very exciting. And you know, the other fun thing along with that is creating villains that are even more detestable than vampires. How do you, yeah, and, you know, I'm sitting here in the seat that Guillermo del Toro probably sat in for a couple months, 20 years ago when he was coming up with the Reapers, something even more terrifying than vampires for Blade 2, which I loved. With the Death Spiders, we have these characters that, yes, they can stand side by side against vampires. They are crueler, they are harder, they are more stubborn. They are basically space barbarians. And getting to create their culture, getting to create Spider-Side, getting to create Webweaver and other who else is going to be debuting in it? I can say their names. It's not like it'll be a spoiler because they're going to be all different. We have Ghost Spider, we have Madam Web, we have White Widow. Getting to build out all these characters and entire culture for Dracula and the vampires to fight has been really, really exciting.
I think it's very interesting. And when you're thinking about, once again, Blood Hunt and Conquest 2099, and also before Blood Hunt, there's also was the comic books Tomb of Dracula. Is there a direct line continuity between the Dracula of Tomb of Dracula Blood Hunt and Conquest 2099?
To me, it's the same character, you know. I mean, we have folded off 2099 into Earth 2099. So the old, I forget this. I'm not trying to misspeak. I believe it used to be Earth 928 before, but there were also, you know, there was Marvel Knights 2099. There was um, at least one other 2099 continuity, if not more, that happened at a previous anniversary event and things like that. So what we did is bring them all together into one reality, where essentially everything happened. That's why you see references to Time Storm, for example, in this run. Um, I mean, the reasoning there is truly to make it so that everything counts in a very Grant Morrison way. And also to solve the fact that at some point we were going to have to admit that it was no longer the year 2099 in these books,
Hmm.
because what a year, if it were to be. So now we have a world where this new heroic age began in the year 2099 with the emergence of Spider-Man, and that's where it takes its name from. But it's not necessarily that same year. After 30 years, even in comics, it was time to admit that a year had passed. Uh, so it's been to me they're the same character with a slight escape hatch of, yes, technically this is a multiverse world now. And that might mean some things like slight renaming of things just to make our world seem a little timeless. You know, we have mentions of Krakoa and things, for example. But a good example is like, we, rather than literally making the thing that um takes Dracula off the board in the heroic age, uh, an attack on Chernobyl, Vampirsk, you know, the vampire homeland on Earth or nation. We created a new one so that we could always sort of say that that happened in the future of the present without having this to necessarily tie it to the moment when, for example, Chernobyl was canon in the present Marvel universe. Because I don't think I'm saying talking out of school here when I say that things change all the time. So we're always like, there are some slight adjustments to make it so that the events of our past are still kind of like in the vague future, and we're never stepping on anyone's toes. But to me, these are the same Dracula. I mean, and just to be clear, from conversation one, we did say this is the tomb of Dracula. He's mysterious, he's romantic, he's passionate, but he's also dangerous as hell.
And I think it's kind of interesting, because you're by saying that it's kind of like its own alt world. Because the thing with obviously writing something in 2099, the Marvel continuity of the current 616 is constantly changing, adding to things. So you'd be constantly beholden to what they do to explain in the future how that impacted the future. Is that difficult to deal with? Is that something that became problematic at some point?
Um, I honestly think it's not something to worry about. And that's not to say that continuity isn't something to worry about. It's to say that there's still 60 to 70 years between now and 2099, even the first year where those stories started. So, I mean, and as you said, it's comics. So even if something massive happens, if we don't want to reference it, to be frank, who knows what happens in the intervening 50 years? And it could be anything. I mean, I mean, even a character dying. I mean, characters die and come back all the time. So it's not as much of a stressor as you might think, because if there's something we like, we can look to it and pull from it. But if there's something that doesn't necessarily fit, well, there's a lot of time in between to say, yeah, that clearly something happened where this character came back. And to me, that's a boon, right? You can pick and choose what works. And it works the other way too. You know, I think we introduced Brimstone Love in Marauders, and everybody assumed that he had come from the world of 2099. And conversely, that didn't need to be true either, because it's only 70 years from now. He's a mutant. Magneto's already over 100 years old. And even if he weren't, I mean, at that time, Krakoans could resurrect. So we've never seen when he was born, and it just was the guy. He just hadn't become the person he was in 2099 yet.
So the other thing that's kind of interesting, as you were mentioning earlier about creating villains for the vampire, because obviously, for the most part, we assume vampires and Dracula as a villain, because they kill people, so we just assume they're bad guys. But you also create the character. If I say pronounce it wrong, let me know. Iranians or Iranians.
Oh, the Iranians. Yeah, the Death Spiders. Yes.
Yeah. So I was trying to how do you pronounce that? What characteristic did you want to give to the spiders to make them bad enough to be rooting for vampires instead of them?
Well, I mean, in a way that they're an exaggeration of vampires. They vampires suck your blood. As we've seen, death spiders as a culture are consumptive and parasitic, and they don't just, I mean, they don't specifically suck your blood, but they grind you down with labor until you have nothing left, basically, and then they cook you and eat you. So, I mean, they really draw everything they can out of you. They use you up in every way. Um, and but unlike vampires, like they're not even hunting equilibrium, especially in 2099, you've seen it once they reach Domus Draconum and they don't have to drink blood from people or animals, that's fine with them, at least the ones that go to Domus Draconum. It's not like some don't stay behind. Uh, which, by the way, like that is my vampire original origin Vampirella illusion for folks who don't perhaps no, originally Vampirella came from the planet Draculon, where the rivers ran with blood. It's only when she gets to America, Earth, that she is surprised to see vampires eat or drink blood from people. So, the Death Spiders are less inhibited. They don't have the same sort of guardrails. They're more toxic, more destructive than vampires, and they're less honorable as well. We took the we made it we mirrored a lot of what few positive aspects Dracula has, and I do think he has some, even if they're fractured. We have exaggerated and mirrored them darkly in the Death Spiders so that they're truly something even he specifically loathes. And it also, we knew from the outset that whatever their culture was like, it had to be so bad that Spider Woman would leave them and never come back.
Hmm.
Of course, until this series, because we knew that she fled her planet after learning what heroism and sacrifice and charity were from Spider-Man. So, which I was really excited to be able to explore her people after we introduced her in Exodus. So we knew that they had to be terrible, and then when we decided they were going to be the ones that attacked the vampire homeworld, we knew they had to be really, really bad. But as you'll see as the series goes on, there is still even they have the capacity for change, and you'll see that as it goes on. There's a lot of groupthink there. There's a lot of fear there, and by the time Conquest is over, it's going to be a bloody one, but there will be a path forward for them.
Is this a situation where, regardless of who wins, the Iranians or the vampires, Earth gets the winner? In other words, are both equally the next? Is Earth in danger regardless of who wins?
I don't think Earth is in danger from vampires. I mean, you'll see what the real answer to this at the end of the book. But when Dracula left from the moon, I mean, he was ready to live in the vampire homeworld and start fresh. Because as we depicted him, he is a noble monster. Miguel gives him an out, and he's willing to take it. He a world where he doesn't have to worry about his people's safety. But of course, he's a cynic. And unfortunately, after that's not even annihilation. That's his issue of Miguel O'Hara. Unfortunately, as we've seen, I can't say human nature, but sentient nature has stepped in. The tragedy of his space casket getting marooned or pirated rather, um, crashing on the planet Midas. Uh, Humanity, Earth has evolved socially when it comes to vampires, but he knows and he guessed and feared and was right that the rest of the universe isn't necessarily there. So I don't think Earth has anything to fear. I think if Dracula had gotten to Domus Draconum, in the grand scheme of things, things would have been, things would have, in time, things would have been fine. He maybe even would have repelled the Death Spiders and Spider-Side along with his daughter. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. That's where tragedy comes from. But no, I would think the Death Spiders are a much greater threat to Earth, if only because they know that's where the biggest stock of vampires still is.
So, if you got into the, I mean, obviously you're the writer, so you're in the minus spider side. What is his version of what Endgame would look like? What is victory to him? Is it, I mean, or the larger idea? Is it just he's going to conquer the universe, and this is how it goes? Does he have a bigger plan of what a universe under his victory would look like?
Well, you've seen that sort of mindset. The Death Spider mindset is mirrored by what's going on in Midas. It's the nightmare version of what goes on in Midas. So, and we know from history that there is no real end game for Empire. There is no real end game for strong men, for autocratic leaders. There's always a new because the minute you relax, people start to realize how fucked up everything is that's going on. So that's why they're a parasitic culture. There is no end game for Spider Side. They have to constantly be expanding. They have to constantly be conquering. They have to constantly be proving their strength time and time again, often in clownish ways. And that's the tragedy of it. Spider-Side himself comes from the lowest rung of society. Aranio is based around the caste system is largely based around how many arms you're born with. You can have two, four, or six arms. Two grips, people with two arms are looked at as the most useless. And it goes up from there. For people with four arms, the four grips are the most common, and people with six arms are generally at the top, born into a respected class. So he comes from the lowest class. He spent his early time, eating shit to survive. And of course, Iranians have to fight for survival from moment one. They don't have parents, they birth in a clutch like spiders do, even though they're humanoid spiders, and their first meal is usually someone else that hatched next to them. So he's led a horrific life. And as he says in one of the issues, I can't remember if it came out yet, he's had to be twice as savage, twice as vicious, twice as everything, just to have people see him as strong at all because of what he's gone through. So that type of pathos, that type of mania doesn't really go away. Um, I'm sure eventually it would destroy him, because that is the tragedy. To answer your original question, there is no end game. If they finally reached the goal line, the post would have to move. Because eventually, as culture stagnated and there were no more victories to celebrate, suddenly it would be, well, Spider-Side's weak. Why isn't Spider-Side, providing? And there'd be another challenge to his leadership. So, and to me, that is, he's not sympathetic, but that's the tragedy of any type of conquering or imperial culture. It's bound to crumble under its own weight. It has happened 100% of times in history. So it's unfortunate and it's tragic, but of course, that's many, many years down the line. We're not really sympathetic to Spider Side right now.
So, in issue two, which is the one that just came out, Silver Surfer 2099, is that the Norman Rad that we are familiar with, or is this a different version of Silver Surfer?
So no, the Surfer 2099, much like Miguel and Peter, it's a different character who hopefully rhymes sort of with the original Lauren Rad. But he is different. The Silver Surfer of 2099 is Jonah Marlowe. He was an activist on Earth. But he died. Didn't die, but contracted a terminal illness far, far too young, and was visited by Mephisto on his deathbed with the offer of immortality and time to do more good work. But of course, it's Mephisto. So he took the deal. Who wouldn't in a moment of weakness? But unfortunately, it wasn't what he thought, and he gets turned into the Silver Surfer, Mephisto's herald, not necessarily herald even, but his wrangler, his pitchman, and he becomes this cosmic angel of death. Where if in between your last heartbeat, your second to last and last heartbeat, he'll appear to you if you're the one of the universe's best, and he'll offer you more time, like he was offered. But the deal is, once your reprieve is up, your soul belongs to Mephisto.
Hmm.
And so he spends all this time, offering people an impossible offer when they're at their very lowest and most vulnerable and damning their souls. Until, much like Norrin Rad coming to Earth, he finds someone where he simply can't do it. He comes to this planet where there are two different classes. One lives a normal lifespan, two different species rather. One lives a normal lifespan, the other lives for 4 months. And because that culture turns over so quickly, the species that lives a normal lifespan have completely rewritten history to oppress these people with short lifespans, because I mean they're, they barely have time to do anything before they pass. So, but this person that the surfer finds has been fighting for the rights of her people, and even on her deathbed, rather than mourning or being sad, she is writing all of these journals. She's passing all of her knowledge on, even though she's only lived for 4 weeks or 4 months or whatever. She's passing everything she knows on so that the fight can continue, a fight that she absolutely won't be there to see followed through upon. And the surfer is supposed to offer her the deal, and he just can't do it. He'd seen sacrifice before, but never for in a life so brief where, where almost nothing else could be experienced except the fight. So he can offer it to her. And, as you might imagine, the minute he doesn't offer the deal, he gets sucked back down to hell and has a confrontation with Mephisto. And they battle just like Norrin and Galactus. And the surfer wants to die. He wants to be punished for the mistakes he's made, for all the people he's damned. But again, it's Mephisto. He's going to do the thing that hurts you the most. So once he realizes the surfer wants to die and wants to be punished, he sets him free and kicks him back out of hell. Now immortal, now still able to sense everybody dying everywhere in the universe, but bereft forever of the punishment he thinks he deserves, because Mephisto realized that living would be a worse punishment for him. So much like Norrin, he soars the spaceways, a somber, shiny guy. But now, rather than offering people a damned, accursed deal when they're near death, he's the champion of life. He's the universal champion of life, where he is going to steal people from the jaws of death and protect them however he can. He stands for life, as you see in this book when he confronts Dracula, above all else.
So
And that's why, by the way, I forget what issue this is, but his issue with Dracula is not about seeking justice. It's about Dracula crossing over from what is just and called for into vengeance and continuing the cycle. So he will say to Dracula that, I mean, he's going to give him the space to do what's right, but he has to beware crossing over that line. And if he does, well, that shiny guy will be there.
So what can our listeners look forward to future issues of Conquest 2099?
Three more issues of giant space opera. Starlord is going to show up. I was really, really excited to create Starlord 2099. She is going to show up and have a showdown with Dracula. You will see some callbacks to Astonishing X-Men. I'll let people see what that is when it happens. You will see, I mean, some of my favorite creations are Cyclops and Phoenix 2099. They're going to get a big showcase along with Nova, along with Spider-Man. And you're going to see the fight make its way not just into the Iranian fleet in this big sort of Last Jedi type battle, but you're also going to see it go to the Iranian homeworld where it all comes together with a massive, massive cataclysmic ending. There's a giant cosmic stake. And of course, there are giant cosmic stakes. Thank you. I'll be here all day. And you will see this final showdown between Dracula and Spider-Side. And you'll see the heroes you love in 2099. Spider-Man, you'll see, the X-Men of 2099, the Red Hulk of 2099, who I loved creating with Pete Woods. They're fighting essentially to save lives, as they say. They're fighting to ensure that there are survivors to this, that people can come out the other side. And I think that's exactly where Spider-Man, specifically Miguel, needs to be.
Well, Mr. Orlando, I want to thank you so much for talking with me. It was great to talk scale trade and Conquest 2009. Hopefully, next time you come on, we can talk about Ewoks. Thank you so much, sir.
It's my pleasure.
Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Vertical Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Return for the next episode when Natalie Moon boards the mothership to discuss Superman and Lois on the CW. To the next voyage, travel on.